Right now, on a reservation in southwestern Oklahoma, there are people who will grind a piece of fossilized bone into a fine gray powder, mix it with water, and press it into an open wound to pull the infection out. They have a name for that powder. In Comanche, it is tsoapitsitsuhni. It translates almost exactly to ghost creature bone. If you ask whose bone it is, you will get an answer that has not changed in over 150 years. The powder comes from the bones of the Piamupits, a race of giants taller than any man, covered in hair, with a face like a human face and feet larger than any foot should be. Giants that hunted people, giants that ate them. This is not a story the Comanche used to tell. It is a medicine some of them still practice. And the strange part, the part that pulls you in and does not let go, is not that the belief survived. It is that the giants were real, just not in the way anyone expected. Today, we are going to follow that bone back into the ground it came from, through the oral traditions of the Comanche, through a dictionary written in 1865, through the notebooks of an anthropologist who was adopted by a medicine woman, and into an excavated canyon in Oklahoma, where the giants have been lying in the dirt for 11,000 years. Because the Comanche were describing something, and the answer to what they were describing is stranger than the legend. To understand the Piamupits, you have to start with how old the record is. This is not a modern story. It is not something that grew up alongside campfire tourism or paperback folklore. The earliest written record of the creature comes from a Spanish and Comanche dictionary compiled in 1865 by a man named Manuel Garcia Rejon, published in Mexico. In it, the Piamupits is described in a single dense sentence that reads almost like a field report. A being, human in shape and gigantic in size, that carries an extraordinarily large staff as a walking stick, that devours human beings, and that lives in caves in the mountains of the distant north. And then one more detail, the kind of detail that makes a legend feel specific rather than invented. It was believed that if the staff broke, the giant would die. That is a strange thing to record in a dictionary. Dictionaries are not usually in the business of cataloging monsters, but the compiler was writing down what Comanche speakers told him the word meant, and this is what the word meant. Not a symbol, not a metaphor for the dark. A described thing with a body, a weapon, a diet, and a home in the mountains to the north. The name itself has been spelled a dozen ways across the records. Mupits, Piamupits, Piamupitsi. The root is often translated as great owl or giant owl, a reference to the way the Comanche admired owls for hunting in silence and in the dark. But it is also translated more bluntly. Big old giant, cannibal owl, the being that eats people. Before we go further, if you find yourself drawn to this kind of thing, history that survives in the mouths of the people who lived it, rather than in textbooks, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps me keep digging into these, and this one took me somewhere I did not expect to end up. Because the deeper you go into the Comanche accounts, the less this looks like a simple boogeyman, and the more it looks like a memory of something specific. In the traditional stories, the Piamupits is not a vague shadow. It has behavior. It has a method. There is a story, preserved in Comanche ethnography, of a hunter out after buffalo who meets one of these giants in the form of an enormous man. The hunter, doing the polite thing, offers the creature meat. The giant is not interested in the meat. The giant wants to eat the hunter. The man runs, and the giant tracks him, follows him all the way back to his own camp, patient and certain, the way a predator follows something it has already decided belongs to it. There is another story of children left behind when a camp moves on, who wander until they reach the giant's cave, and who only escape with the help of a string of animals: a frog, a crane, an eagle, a buffalo, a calf, each one buying them a little more distance from the thing in the cave behind them. What gets me about these stories is how consistent the geography is. The giant lives in a cave. The giant lives in the mountains. The cave is a real place in the landscape, not a spiritual location. And nearly every account, from the 1865 dictionary to the stories recorded generations later, agrees on the physical description. Tall, hairy, a face like a man's, big feet, something that walked upright, that looked almost human, and that was hungry. The Comanche National Museum and Cultural Center in Lawton keeps its own version of the Piamupits alive, the giant with a cottonwood tree for a cane, the one parents invoke to quiet a loud child. That is the domesticated version, the one that shrank down into a nursery threat. But underneath it is something much older and much larger, and to see the shape of it, you have to look at what one man wrote down in 1857. In 1857, an account was recorded and attributed to a Comanche leader referred to as Chief Rolling Thunder. I want to be careful here, because this particular account travels through a lot of unreliable channels, and its sourcing is thin. So I am going to give it to you as exactly what it is. A thing that was written down in 1857 and attributed to a Comanche speaker. Not as proven fact. What was recorded was this: that innumerable moons ago, a race of white men, 10 feet high, far richer and more powerful than any people living now, inhabited a vast range of country stretching from the rising sun to the setting sun. That their fortifications crowned the summits of the mountains, that their cities filled the valleys between, that they excelled every other nation in every kind of craft, that they were brave and warlike, and that compared to them, the ordinary men of the present day were pygmies in both art and arms. And then the ending that every version of this story seems to arrive at. The Great Spirit destroyed them, wiped them off the land, because they had grown proud, because they had forgotten justice and mercy. Here is why I bring it up, even with the sourcing caveat, because it is the same shape as the Piamupits, scaled up into history. Giants, 10 feet tall, living in the mountains, gone now, destroyed in the deep past, remembered only in the bones and the fortifications they left behind. Two versions of the same idea, one told as a monster in a cave, one told as a vanished empire in the mountains, both insisting on the same thing, that before us, something enormous walked this land, and then it was gone. The obvious modern reaction is to file this under tall tale and move on. But the Comanche were not simply inventing giants out of nothing. They were looking at something. They were holding the evidence in their hands. And this is where the story stops being folklore and starts being, of all things, medicine. Her name was Sanapia. She was born in the spring of 1895 in a teepee in a Comanche encampment near Fort Sill, in what was then Oklahoma Territory. She was the sixth of 11 children. Her maternal uncle, after healing her from a childhood illness, made her promise to become a medicine woman and gave her a name that meant memory woman, so that she would never forget what she was responsible for carrying. She became a Comanche eagle doctor. By the time an anthropologist named David E. Jones sought her out in the 1960s, she was described as the last surviving one. Jones was so committed to recording her methods, and she was so committed to having them recorded before they were lost, that she eventually adopted him as a son. His book about her, published in 1972, is one of the most detailed accounts we have of how a Comanche healer actually worked. And in her medicine kit, alongside the botanical remedies, the sneezeweed and the mescal bean, she kept fossilized bone. She called them Piamupits, bones. She told Jones exactly what they were: the bones of the giant, large, hairy, tall, big feet, a face like a man's. She said that when the giants died of old age, their bones stayed in the ground. And those bones, she knew, were valuable medicine. She was not the first. An account from 1942 already described fragments of fossil bone, believed to be the bones of the Piamupits, used to treat sprains and broken bones. Sanapia used them for exactly the same thing. Now here is the part that stopped me when I first read it. The medicine works, and it works for a reason that has nothing to do with magic. Comanche healers used fragments of fossilized mammoth leg bone to draw boils, infections, poison, and pain out of wounds. Fossil bone is porous. When you press porous stone against a weeping, infected wound, it does something a physicist would recognize immediately: capillary action. The tiny channels in the bone wick moisture, and with it, the infection, up and out of the wound, the same way a paper towel pulls up a spill. They called it medicine bone. Some called it madstone. Ground into powder, mixed with water, that same fossil bone becomes tsoapitsitsuhni, ghost creature bone. And if the fossil carried enough calcium sulfate, enough gypsum, the mixture could even be worked into a kind of plaster, a cast to set against a broken limb. So sit with the full picture for a second. A Comanche healer finds enormous bones eroding out of the Oklahoma ground, bones far too large to belong to any animal she has ever seen alive. She recognizes them as the remains of a giant, a being from the oldest stories, the cannibal in the mountains, and she uses those bones to heal her own people, effectively, in a way modern science can explain. The legend and the medicine are the same object. The giant is not a story she tells. It is a thing she holds in her hand. The question is what she was actually holding. You can go and stand at the place these bones come out of the ground, Domebo Canyon, in Caddo County, Oklahoma. In the early 1960s, a man named Buck Patterson noticed bones eroding out of a creek bank and contacted archaeologists at the Museum of the Great Plains in Lawton. What they excavated was a mammoth, not just a mammoth, a kill site. The skeleton of a Columbian mammoth that had died roughly 11,000 years ago, surrounded by the stone tools of the Clovis hunters who had brought it down and butchered it. Some of the first human beings ever to stand on this continent, and the giant they killed. Not far away, in Comanche County itself, sits Richard Spur, the richest bed of Permian fossils in the entire state. The Wichita Mountains run through Comanche, Kiowa, and Jackson counties, an ancient range full of caves, granite that was cooling underground more than 500 million years ago. Mountains to the north, full of caves, full of the bones of enormous vanished creatures, exactly where the 1865 dictionary said the giants lived. The Comanche were not making the giants up, they were reading them out of the ground. And to understand how right they were, you have to talk about a woman at Stanford. Her name is Adrienne Mayer, a research scholar at Stanford who has spent her career on a single remarkable idea: that the giants and monsters of ancient legend all over the world were not fantasies. They were interpretations. They were what happened when intelligent people, long before the science of paleontology existed, found the fossilized bones of enormous extinct animals and tried to reconstruct the creature they belonged to. In her book, Fossil Legends of the First Americans, she traces exactly this across the tribes of North America. And the Comanche example is one of the clearest she found. She went to contemporary Comanche storytellers and tradition bearers and listened to what they said about the Piamupits, and she matched it against the geology. Here is the mechanism, and it is beautifully simple. Take the femur, the thigh bone, of a Columbian mammoth. set it next to a human femur. It is the same shape, the same ball joint, the same shaft, the same basic architecture, because both are the leg bones of large mammals. But the mammoth femur is 2 or 3 times longer and vastly heavier. Now imagine you have never seen a living mammoth. You have never seen an elephant. You find that bone in a creek bed. What do you conclude? You conclude, correctly and logically, that it belonged to a person the size of the bone, a giant. The Comanche looked at the fossil record of the Ice Age, the mammoths, the mastodons, the giant bison, and they did what any careful observer would do. They reconstructed the owner of the bones. They got the size right. They got the deep antiquity right, the sense that these things came from a world before this one. They got the extinction right, that these giants were gone, that they had been destroyed and did not walk the earth anymore. Everything except the fur and the cannibalism, they got right. And those bones do not come with a face attached. The face, the hunger, the cave, that is the part a human mind supplies to fill the silence the bones leave behind. That is what I keep coming back to. We are trained to hear a story about 10-foot cannibal giants and file it under superstition, under the things people believed before they knew better. But the Comanche were not failing to understand the world. They were understanding it, using the only evidence available without a single tool of modern science. They held a mammoth bone and correctly deduced a vanished age of giants. They intuited deep time, that the land had a history stretching back unimaginably far. They intuited extinction, that whole kinds of creatures could rise and rule and then be wiped away. These are ideas that Western science would not formalize until the 18th and 19th centuries, and the Comanche had them encoded in a word in a dictionary and a bone in a medicine kit. They were wrong about the fur. They were wrong about the man's face and the appetite for human flesh. But the frame was right. Something enormous had lived here. It was gone now, and its bones were still in the ground, waiting. And that tradition did not die politely in a museum case. It is still here. The Comanche National Museum in Lawton still tells the story of the Piamupits. Modern Comanche in Oklahoma still use fossilized bone, mammoth, and dinosaur for medicinal purposes. And in 2022, when the film Prey put a Comanche hero on screen, the filmmakers brought in Comanche cultural consultants, and there is a moment where the young hero, trying to describe the monster she has seen, says it looked like a Muppetzel. One of the men scoffs at her. "A monster from a children's story," he says. That line lands differently once you know what the children's story is made of, because the Muppetzel is not invention. It is a memory, worn smooth by 150 years of retelling, of a real encounter between people and the enormous bones of a lost world. Every time the story shrank, from a vanished empire of giants to a cannibal in a cave to a threat used to quiet a noisy child, it kept its core intact. Something huge was here before us. It is gone. Do not forget it. So here is where the story leaves me, and I would like to know where it leaves you. We have a race of giants, described in a dictionary from 1865, catalogued with a body and a weapon and a home in the northern mountains. We have a vanished empire of 10-foot beings recorded in 1857, destroyed for their pride. We have a medicine woman in the 20th century who kept their bones in her kit and used them to heal the sick, and who could tell you exactly what the giants looked like. And we have an excavated canyon where those exact bones, 11,000 years old, still come out of the Oklahoma dirt. The giants were not 10 feet tall and covered in hair, but they were real. They were the mammoths and the mastodons and the great beasts of the Ice Age, and the Comanche found their bones and read the truth out of them, that this land is old, that it was ruled by something enormous, and that the enormous thing is gone. That is not a failure of science. In a way, it is the first draft of it. So I will put the question to you the way it sits with me. When you look at what the Comanche built out of a bone in a creek bed, do you see people who got it wrong? Or do you see people who, with nothing but their eyes and their reason and a giant thigh bone in their hands, got almost everything right? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read them, and this is exactly the kind of thing I want to argue about with you. If you want more of this, more of the places and the peoples whose oldest stories turn out to be carrying something real, subscribe and stick around.